Do you want to put some thumbs up if you feel ready to start again? Amazing. Amazing to feel that you're all here. Thanks so much to all of those speakers this morning. I felt like this has really allowed us to put some faces on this whole process that's maybe overwhelming when we don't have a good idea of what it is. And really, it's important. I really would like to invite everyone to give like another round of applause for all the work that's been done. I really liked, and this, I feel like it's rare as a young person that I feel that lived experience of youth are valued in such a way. And I really felt like, although it's important to acknowledge the differences between the countries, the regions, and just the different categories of society and the different factors of oppression, I feel like we do have a lot in common. And I really loved especially how Sally and Carla really on a personal note explained and talked about the importance of considering the mental health and emotional toll that climate change has over youth. It's it's really a fundamental aspect of my vision of the world as a youth, and it's very unheard of in my experience, just see adults talking about it in such a way in an institutional context. And I feel like that's change happening. So thank you so much, everyone, and that's great. And so now we'll have just a short panel, about 20 minutes, on oceans, forests, and food sovereignty. And then we'll have a lunch break. And after that, I think the final part of the day, so session 3, will really be dedicated to really opening the conversation, being able to hear you all, having all of the participants much more involved. And so I really invite you to stay tuned, keep that energy going. I invite you to also do anything you need to make yourselves comfortable. I've eaten, I've gotten myself drinks, coffee, wear your pajama if that helps. But really, we want it to be a space where people feel good. And so really don't hesitate to do whatever you need. Opening, closing your camera. I think that just, I know there's connection issues, but even just, turning your camera on, even though you need to eat, also makes this more lively. So really, anything you wish. That's it. So let's privilege our well-being. So without further ado, I would like to invite Sean McCabe to facilitate the next panel.
Very much, Albert. Can everyone hear me okay? Great stuff. I'd just like to say quickly, it's a real privilege. I'm not actually in North America. I'm in Ireland, as the accent might give away. And it's a privilege to be looking on and seeing such dedicated work across the 3 countries involved here, and the humility in which it's being put across. And really well done to all of our colleagues who navigated that first session and the hurdles. And thank you for staying with us. And thank you particularly to the 3 panelists that we have for this session for staying with us. We're really privileged to have 3 great speakers who I will introduce in a moment. The idea of this panel is to give you all an introduction to oceans, forests, and food sovereignty, how these 3 areas interrelate, and how they pertain to people's dignity and rights. We will, as Albert has said, keep it short. We will let our speakers go, and we will let you all have lunch. But for now, I'd just like to introduce our 3 speakers who hopefully are still with us. We've Gabrielle Rossenbacher from the Coral Restoration Foundation, Torrance Costa from the Wilderness Committee, and John Russell from the North American Marine Alliance. Guys, if you are there, hello to you. It's a bit strange trying to figure this out on the platform, but I might ask you to introduce yourselves in order, and tell us a little bit about your background and the work that you do. And perhaps we could start with you, Gabrielle, if you're there.
Yes, I am here.
Fantastic.
I am just going to share my screen. Let me know if this works. Can everybody see my screen? Yes, I'm hoping so. All right. So I'm just going to begin. I want to say thank you so much for having me. I really am honored to be here speaking for the oceans. My name is Gabrielle Rosenbacher, and I am currently the Education Program Intern at Coral Restoration Foundation, based in the Florida Keys. All right, I'm just trying to click next here. There we are. So for 500 million years, corals dominated the shallow tropical seas of our marine environment. They create complex habitat and ultimately exist as the most diverse ecosystem on this planet. But unfortunately, this once diverse habitat that you see in the left image now looks like the picture on the right. So in the last 30 years or so, we have lost half of the coral reefs around the globe. And Florida's coral reef currently only has about 1 to 2% of its historical hard coral habitat. And corals not only create a beautiful underwater habitat, but they also support marine life that ultimately supports our fisheries, protect our lands from storms, and provide resources and economic value to us humans, especially locals who depend on the reefs for a livelihood. And we expect in the next 80 years or so that all coral reefs may go extinct, making this diverse ecosystem the most threatened habitat on Earth, with countless species facing extinction. And there are a lot of compound stressors that cause this rapid decline. For example, Florida's coral reef has been affected by direct human impact, the disappearance of herbivores, development and pollution, and also the harsh chemicals in sunscreens. But ultimately, anthropogenic climate change is posing the greatest threat to our coral reefs. Although this all sounds terribly frightening, Coral Restoration Foundation now has the opportunity to intervene and develop methods of coral restoration and conservation that are now being used around the world in hopes of offsetting this rapid decline. We work to support the reef's natural recovery process through the large-scale cultivation, outplanting, and monitoring of genetically diverse reef-building corals. We grow corals in offshore coral tree nurseries and then return them to the wild on carefully selected sites. Once they grow to a reef-ready size in our nurseries, the corals are transported to a restoration site where we clear the reef site of algae and attach the corals with a non-toxic marine epoxy. We then monitor these corals to learn about their survivorship in hopes of them spawning in future years, creating new, genetically diverse corals, kickstarting the natural recovery process. In total, we have returned over 130,000 corals to the wild, and that number continues to grow every week. These are our signs of hope that the reefs can recover. And Coral Restoration Foundation's goal is to return the reefs of the Florida Keys to a functional level and to stabilize reefs so that they can jumpstart themselves to health. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Gabrielle. And we will come back to you in a moment to talk about the impacts that healthy oceans have on healthy communities on the land. Next, we might turn to Torrance, if you're there, Torrance, to tell us a little bit about your work and what drives you.
Thanks so much. Thanks to all of you for having me. We're traveling north and west from the Florida Panhandle to the west coast of Canada. I'm calling in today from my home on the unceded territories of the Lekwungen and the Cowichan nations. And I want to recognize and uphold that all conversations about food and forests and oceans need to be grounded in the need for justice for the indigenous peoples to whom these lands belong. I work for a multi-issue nonprofit conservation organization called the Wilderness Committee, and I lead our work on forest conservation. I didn't have time to prep a great presentation like the last one for today, but I can talk a little bit about our work to protect forests. The Wilderness Committee was founded in 1980, and we've been fighting to protect old growth forests, so forests that have never been logged on an industrial basis in Western Canada and across Canada since then. Our organization isn't that we shouldn't, our position isn't that we shouldn't have a logging industry. It's not that we shouldn't make things out of wood or use forest products. It's that the management of forests needs to improve to better balance other priorities. And the remaining forests that haven't been logged in the province of Canada that I live in, it's a very small percentage, less than 20%. And those forests we maintain should be protected to support all those values that the forests provide. So the way we do our work is across a range of tactics. There are protests, demonstrations in the streets, also obviously impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, our ability to gather. We work to lobby provincial and federal and municipal government officials, and really we work to mobilize the public. We bring people out into the woods when we can, and when we can't, we bring photos, videos, images, information and stories from the forest back to people. Canada is one of the most urbanized countries in the world in terms of the percentage of our population that lives urbanly as opposed to in rural settings. And so a lot of people don't know the difference between an old growth forest and a second growth forest, and the impacts of industrial logging and unsustainable forest management aren't as apparent to them. So we believe that a public that is informed and educated will be empowered to take action and to push for the political, the changes at the political level to improve forest management, to protect biodiversity and ecosystems. And really in the last couple of years, the way our work has shifted is from kind of classic environmentalism and into drawing the links between healthy forest ecosystems and the rights of Indigenous peoples and a safe and healthy climate. The link between forests, especially here in the western part of North America, because of their carbon density, which I'll get into maybe in my second little session, that's such a key thing to uphold and center in this conversation. I'll leave it there for now, and again, delighted to be part of this event today.
Thank you very much, Terence. That's a fantastic intervention, and we already, I think you can begin to see the links that develop between livelihoods and the tensions there. And then, you know, as we saw with the early iterations of RED and continued under the UNFCCC, where land rights and ownership come into conflict with conservation and Indigenous uses of land. So thank you very much. We will move on next to John, who is going to speak to us about his experiences working on food systems and specifically food sovereignty. John, if you're there.
Awesome. Yeah. What's good, everyone? Yeah, so my name is John Russell, he, him pronouns or any pronouns, and I work for the North American Marine Alliance. And my role there is the food justice organizer. And what we do is we work with fisher folk all across North America and just try to like work at the productions aspect of like our food systems to push for food sovereignty. And so, you know, what is food sovereignty? So I'm going to be speaking like pretty like off the cuff, but one definition that'll sound a little bit robotic, but food sovereignty is the right of peoples to a healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods, and their right to define their own food and agriculture systems. So, I mean, basically, it's just people have their own self-determination. In short, it's the food around them they have control of, they have influence of, and it reflects who they are, which is how food has been for eons before this like rampant colonialism we're seeing today. And so we work directly with fisher folk and just like try to like make the dents we can in the system, whether it be through organizing fishers of a community to be like working together to be able to provide like direct food to their communities, whether it be working with grassroots movements to make noise against like big food systems. You know, we're in those kind of directions. And the reason we did this, like the fight for food sovereignty, is such an important fight because, as you heard in one of the last videos we just watched, of just like how important land is, because for self-determination, land is one of the most important parts of that. Being able to have your own homes, your own farms, your own communities, your own villages, and that right is being attacked, whether it be, you know, in the United States, just with like, you know, gentrification and like land theft from like black folks and indigenous folks, or you know, like the threat to or like the water scarcity and such of the First Nations in Canada, and then just like land and privatization issues in Mexico, Central America, Global South. All of these large corporations are threatening food sovereignty everywhere, and and then what's so beautiful about the fight for food sovereignty is that it really helps tie together all of these things that are impacting our food system in a negative way, but it also helps bring together all of like the beauty of the work we're doing, because within food sovereignty, it contains like cultural restoration and reclamation. It contains like what it means to like have community, what it means to have meals with each other. Like when you think of food sovereignty, think of just like a beautiful meal like prepared by friends around you, and just like sharing that experience with people. And it's like that's why we're doing all of this fighting. So yeah, I just wanted to share a little bit of how food sovereignty blends into our food systems work.
Thank you very much, John. We'll go back to each of the panelists in turn again and just touch on, or maybe we might go the opposite direction. We might stay with you, John, seeing as you're on screen, and maybe talk a little bit about how food system, food sovereignty, and your work with the oceans dimension of food sovereignty underpins the rights and dignity of people.
Yeah, so something that's very prescient right now is we are fighting against the release of genetically engineered salmon in the United States, because, I mean, first of all, in the Pacific Northwest, there are many indigenous cultures that treat themselves as salmon people, like their blood is salmon and they view themselves as people of salmon. So to genetically modify that is a massive threat to their sovereignty, and it's like modifying them. And then there's the like privatization piece where the more we patent nature, like the more we'll see people like make more aggressive grabs for claiming nature as their own, and it's none of ours. Like we have to be working in reciprocity with nature. So whether and we've seen this with like GMO corn, which is also incredibly culturally relevant to so many indigenous people, GMO soy, and even like GMO pesticides, where Monsanto has historically just sprayed pesticides over land and been like, now this is ours because of our patent in the land. And so, and frankly, you see this taking over where we see how factory farms took over the farming sector. And then we saw how like GMO corn took over like that section. And right now we're kind of seeing that same take with like things like Impossible Burger and Beyond Meat, where they're using these GMO soys and everything to do these massive land grabs to continue the corporate consolidation of our food systems. And the fight for genetically engineered salmon is trying to stop that before it happens, before this massive consolidation of more aspects of our food system is happening. And all the while underpinning the like important cultural like significance that salmon really has, and many other foods do too. So just like really fighting against the corporate consolidation and uplifting the culture while doing so.
Thank you, John. I think a point that you're making there that very clearly is the relationship that exists between our markets, the global markets, and then the lives of people, and the action that we take to try to protect our environment. When you're talking about, you know, actions that are intended to be good for the planet but are actually horrible for people. The very good example is the issue with biofuels and bioethanol in the US, which ended up causing massive commodity spikes and making food too expensive for people to afford in other parts of the world. So thank you very much. Terence, we might come back to you, and you know, you raised numerous issues of justice in your first intervention. Perhaps you might want to elaborate on some of them and explain how forest preservation interrelates with regeneration interrelates with human rights.
Yeah, of course. I want to speak to that, but it's impossible for me not to build on and respond to what the points that John just made. Being in what's often called the Pacific Northwest or the West Coast, living on the territories of salmon people, and being a settler here and learning about my responsibilities around that. The salmon farming industry is extremely controversial, and it relates to what you just brought up, Sean, is that it was originally billed as an environmental solution, right? It's a way to farm protein, to take the pressure off fishing wild stocks. The salmon that are farmed here on the West Coast are Atlantic salmon, because those are the ones that have been, that the industry's built in the Atlantic in Scandinavia, and they brought those species here and started to farm them in Pacific waters. They don't go here, and this directly infringes on the rights of the nations who are so reliant on salmon. And so I appreciated all those points, and I follow a little bit the work around GMO salmon in the US, and I'd love to connect more on that moving forward to see how I can help. Shifting to my topic, the two are so related. Here on the West Coast, the salmon migrations are trackable when a tree's cut down and you look at the rings on the stump. The big salmon years in history, right, in oral tradition, 75 years ago, it was a record salmon return, and you can see the next year the ring on the tree is actually thicker because of the influx of nutrients. The salmon spawn and then die, and they're dragged into the forest by wolves and bears and raccoons and eagles and other species, and they actually the forest growth is trackable based on the salmon. So the interconnectedness of these topics in this panel can't be understated. To shift to the current context, right now, most of the province of BC, where I am on the coast, it's okay, but most of the province is under wildfire smoke. You know, we just experienced a heat dome here. The Canadian temperature record was set just inland from the coast a couple of weeks ago, and then days later, the town where that record was set burned to the ground in a wildfire. And there was an update yesterday from the head of the wildfire service that said usually at the stage we're at right now, it's the end of August, right? And we're only in mid-July. So the fires here are driven by both climate change, right? There's hotter, drier weather, and by forest management, right? So when we manage forests to be sources of timber and fiber, they become filled with fuel more so than a natural ecosystem. And so the prioritization of forests as a resource under capitalism for the last 150 years is part of what is stacking the deck. And then the feedback loop is terrifying too, because here in this part of Canada, there's a lot of running water, and most of our energy, most of our electricity comes from hydroelectric, so relatively low carbon, not without its own set of consequences. But in most years, the biggest source of carbon emissions in BC, where I live, isn't from transportation, it's not from heavy industry, it's from forest fires. And so this, which in turn those emissions make climate change worse and stack the deck for more, for more forest fires. So these feedback loops are not taken into account, and the general interconnectedness that a couple of us have brought up now aren't taken into account. And I think that the answer lies in looking back and looking at the current wisdom and knowledge held by the only people that have ever lived sustainably in this part of the world, and that's the indigenous peoples of this continent. Those science systems, those knowledge systems are here, they exist, and it's about upholding those and integrating them with the way we manage resources and manage our societies. Yeah, I'll leave it there, but thanks so much for listening. I'll post some information about my organization and ways you can contact me in the chat. Hopefully that works right there. And yeah, I'd love to hear from some of you. Thank you.
That's brilliant, Terence. Thank you. And it really is that holistic understanding of the relationship between our natural systems and us as part of the natural system too, and trying to value local and traditional knowledge in ways that we have disregarded up to this point. Gabrielle, we'll come back to you. We started with you, and we'll come back to you to conclude. If you want to respond to what you've heard, or tell us a little bit about, how the work that you're doing connects to rights, and particularly maybe children's rights, if you want to touch on that. But it's up to you.
Yes, absolutely. I'm really just going to speak now about, I guess, the importance of coral reefs and of the oceans for the entire worldwide. So just talking about their ecosystem services and what they do for us and what we're at risk of losing if we lose them. So coral reefs, they don't only provide us with coastal protection or resources, food, medicine, jobs, but they are actually valued at nearly $10 trillion globally every single year. And this is value that comes from the ecosystem services that it does provide. So by 2050, it's actually estimated that the planet is going to have lost 90% of the world's coral, making the most diverse ecosystem on this planet the most threatened habitat on Earth. And that means that countless of species are going to be facing extinction. And I want everybody to let that sink in for just a moment. I don't mean that one or two species of coral or fish are going to disappear, or that you're going to have snapper sandwich instead of grouper the next time that you visit the Florida Keys, but that the entire ecosystem might actually disappear from this planet. And that means that all those things that it provides for us, food, coastal protection, livelihoods, those are also at risk of completely disappearing. So in fact, over 275 million people worldwide live in the direct vicinity of coral reefs. And that means that they are living within 10 kilometers of the coast, making these locals most at risk for losing their income, their homes, livelihoods. And yet approximately 850 million people live within 100 kilometers of coral reefs, still directly affecting these populations. However, the loss of these coral reefs, it's a climate justice issue affecting millions of people worldwide, whether you live within the vicinity or not. And humans aren't the only ones who need coral reefs for their ecosystems. How, although they actually only cover less than 1% of the Earth's surface, nearly 25% of all marine species rely on coral reefs at some point throughout their lives. And actually, every 3 out of 4 breaths of oxygen that you breathe come from our healthy oceans, of which healthy coral reefs play a very important role. So coastal communities around the globe, they will be suffering from these consequences of global reef decline far before the ecosystem actually goes extinct. We are already seeing increased frequency of storms, including hurricanes, tropical storms, severe flooding, and marine habitat destruction will also lead to a decrease in food availability, meaning that populations around the globe won't have access to a main food source. We're trying to work to restore this coral reef habitat that sustains that food source so that the next generations can survive. And this is a collaborative effort. It's important to make sure that we're not imposing our approach on any community. We really try to heavily engage and empower the local community to help join, to spread the awareness, to educate, to save the planet's coral reefs. We can't do this alone. So large-scale massive action, it's going to be required to make this difference for our next generations to survive. And even though CRF focuses specifically on coral reef ecosystems, we still look to educate others about the interconnectedness of all the ecosystems. All of them are connected. And we are just trying to show people that any positive action matters. Any action counts. And the best thing for somebody to actually do for coral reefs is to just find and then commit to any local environmental cause and continue to spread that awareness near and far. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabrielle. What comes out in that, as with Torrance and John, is our interdependence, not just on each other, but on the systems that provide our lives, and how the exploitation of those systems for a few cause problems for the many. And so I think maybe, it's been a long morning. We've had a really brilliant opening panel, which has explored a lot. From Canada, Mexico, and the US, and now bringing a very acute lens on oceans, forests, and food sovereignty. I think we can all take a step back now, take a break, have a bit of lunch, and come back afterwards thinking about that interconnectedness and how we might work to solve injustices together. So, Torrance, John, Gabrielle, thank you very much. I will pass back to Albert to give us our marching orders. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you so much, everyone. John, Gabriel, Torrance, I think you really spoke eloquently of the interconnectedness of both our fights, the ecosystems, and the problems that we're facing. That was amazing. I think it really sets the tone. It's a great basis to build out from during our next pod sessions that will follow this lunch break. So yeah, I think without further ado, we can just go eat, make ourselves comfortable, really take some time to breathe. So if I'm not mistaken, I think we'll be back here in 30 minutes. So see you soon, everyone. Thank you so much for all of your amazing contributions in today so far. That was amazing. I personally feel very energized by all of this. It's both very energy consuming, but it also really feeds me intellectually and emotionally. So thank you so much. See you.